One, I guess it would be unfair to talk about scanners and not mention the exploding head. They had three of these creatures, pre-wired all of them with squibs, and action blew it up. The head blew up, but this giant spark and smoke came out of it. And David said, I don't like the smoke. I don't like the flash. Everyone on the set, get well out of the way. Just find some shelter. Put a double-barreled shotgun on the back of his head and blew the brains out. No squib, no explosive, no flash, just brains everywhere. And that is what you see in the movie.
Today we have Mark Irwin, cinematographer on such films as Scanners, The Brood, Videodrome, Scream, The Fly, The Dead Zone, Dumb and Dumber, Kingpin, There's Something About Mary, and many, many more. So let's get to it, shall we? So Mark, could you tell me just briefly, how did you get into film? Where did you start, and just tell me a bit about where you came from.
Well, Kyle, I'm from Toronto originally, and that's where I was born and raised. And I started in the actual film business as a 5-year-old Sunday school student who was taught how to thread a film strip projector, which was Joseph in his coat of many colors of 1955. And that got me fascinated with images on, not painted images, but images on particular strips of film. So that hooked me early on in life, and film strip, slides, 16 millimeter projectors. I was the AV geek all through public school, high school, and university. So that's what connected me to wanting to make films. And in high school in the 60s, we used to shoot films with what is still called a 8-8 camera, which used 16 millimeter film with an 8 millimeter gate. So you'd thread the film into this little gate. It would go down. You'd take the film out, having exposed it, turn it around, and thread it through again. Now it was going upside down, but it was exposing the other half of the 16 millimeter frame. You'd send that to Kodak, and they would process it and slit it and give you 200 feet of 8 millimeter, not Super 8, but 8 millimeter. That's what fed the whole Super 8 revolution in the 60s. But that's when I realized, and I was taking pictures, shooting movies, and more or less decided that that's what I wanted to do. I ended up going to England for a year in 1969 to 1970. Didn't quite get in the film business there, which everything happens for a reason, and that happened for the reason that I would come back to Toronto, go to film school, meet a few people, and then start making feature films, low budget and no budget movies. We, like most of us in the A.S.C, in fact, I started shooting what is now considered softcore entertainment, adult entertainment, also known as softcore porn. And this was for theaters in 35 millimeter because they projected in 35 mil. We shot these movies in what are called short ends. And from other productions and commercials, they had 1,000 feet of film. They had a 200-foot short end. It wasn't enough to shoot another take, so they take it out and can it, stack all the cans up, and sell that raw stock to us. So that is how I started making movies, scrambling in a changing bag, trying to put reels of film together. The connection to the porn films was that the director was a gentleman called Ed Hunt, who all of us in Toronto were just that. We were Torontonians. Ed was from Southern California, a place called Whittier. And he was, like many people in the film business at the time, he was a draft dodger. And he recounted, he got a letter from Washington, and it stated, "Greetings from Richard Milhouse Nixon. You are hereby inducted into the U.S. Army." And so he said 24 hours later, he was in north of the border, and he ended up in Toronto making these films. My connection with him paid off in my first feature in 35. I shot a bunch in Super 16 and 16 millimeter blow-up movies. The one in 35 was called Starship Invasions for Warner Brothers. starring Robert Vaughn and Christopher Lee. So my first film in 35 mil in 1975 with Christopher Lee, it was quite something. And I slowly put a crew together and slowly kind of proved myself to other producers, because it was all, in those days, it was all word of mouth. It was rare that people would go to see the movies. Certainly not the movies that I shot that ended up at the Pussycat Theater on Bloor Street. Nonetheless, that was my connection. My direct connection to David Cronenberg was a film I did in 1977, and it was called Blood and Guts. A family entertainment for sure. It was a film about wrestling and a wrestling troupe that would go from town to town and kind of stage these wrestling. Wrestling is theater, physical theater, and in this case, it was cinematic. The producer of this film, his name was Peter O'Brien. He wanted to pay tribute to American International Pictures and a guy called Sam Arkoff. So I'm going to pause and ask you if you know what AIP was.
Yes, I do.
Okay, good. So his take on cinema was movies, make movies. The next film he wanted to do, or what actually did, was about drag racing, another all-American element. Shot in Canada with stars and stripes on every flagpole. Okay, now we're in America, a trend that certainly continues to this day. And he looked all over the landscape in Canada for a director for this film and decided that David Cronenberg was the director for the drag racing movie. And David, at that point, had a successful release with Shivers and Rabbit, and it was not an AIP kind of background that he had, but he was someone who owned and raced vintage sports cars. He in fact, he owned Sir Sterling Moss's Lotus Super 7, and still owns a lot of cars. However, driving expensive English motor cars around in a circle and doing a film about nitromethane top fuelers and funny AA funny cars, different world. But he was hired to direct the film. Peter O'Brien said, well, I've got this guy who did Blood and Guts. I want you to meet him. So I met David at a bar, an Italian restaurant in Toronto. And it was one of those kind of meetings where, hey, how you doing? And you shake hands and look over. He was looking over my shoulder for somebody else. And that somebody else was a French, not a French Canadian, a French, Parisian French cinematographer called René Verzier, who shot a film previously for David. And I didn't get the gig. So that was 1977. By the summer of 1978, and this was on the Thursday before the Monday, the first day of shooting, and René Verzier, the Parisian, who would smoke cigarettes like Gauloise like this, he got a show in Paris. Bonne chance, adieu, and à bientôt. And he split. He left. So that's when Peter O'Brien, my champion, pushed and prodded David. I got a call at midnight, Thursday night, Friday morning. Hey, can you be in Edmonton? We'd love to. So I show up, somewhat jet lagged that day, meet David again, and meet a whole crew that I didn't know, not a soul. I managed to bring in my focus puller. That was it. Ooh. And we started shooting on Monday. So a drag racing film is definitely outdoor, big, broad. The producer said, at one point we were shooting with all these flags and everybody cheering, and he said, the red, white, and blueness of it all. He was totally stoked about what we were presenting. And after the first week, we'd seen dailies that went to Vancouver and then came back. And David, yeah, I think you understand me. I think we're on the same wavelength. This is when I decided to shut up and not mention the fact that my thesis in film school was all about David Cronenberg. And the fact that as an AV geek, I would screen these films, but for one or two classes, while they were watching them, maybe they were getting bored. I was studying stereo and Crimes of the Future and all the films that David had done. And I would take back to my AV room and watch it again and study it. That was my introduction, my own blockbuster, that I could watch the movies that I wanted. And So that's how I connected myself to David on a completely non uh, horror film kind of platform, the Great Outdoors. And Fast Company is a great little movie. Uh, he had his hands full with, well, I'm blanking on her name, Claudia Jennings, the Queen of the Bees. None of us had ever heard of Quaaludes, but she decided that that was the drug to take when you were driving a car. Yeah, get out of her way. So anyway, that's how I started with
So
David.
just jumping back a little bit, you mentioned being like you wrote your thesis on Cronenberg. Like how did like what drew you to him? Like I know the Canadian like film scene at that time was kind of starting to find, I guess, an identity. But what kind of drew you to the early films of Cronenberg?
The early films of Cronenberg, theatrically released, were part of another part of Canada. Most Americans don't understand that French and English Canada are two distinct societies. French Canada, with 6 million in the 70s, 6 million French speaking people, some of whom did not speak English. It was just French. The producers in Quebec had a huge market that was all theirs. They made films in French or in Quebec, uh, and they had their own guaranteed market. So David was drawn into that financing and that production side of the world of Canada. I was drawn into his work as someone who wrote, directed, shot. He was a cinematographer as well, produced, edited. He was a filmmaker, but most importantly, he was an English Canadian filmmaker. He was from Toronto. That's how I could relate to him. And everything that was done in Quebec was would get all the awards. Were they all these thoughtful period films with lots of snow and people arguing in French and driving around in French and doing all the things that I couldn't do. But I saw David doing his things in English Canada, and I related to him as a fellow uh, English Canadian filmmaker. So that's what drew me to him as a person. His films themselves are very, very strong in the sense that the visuals told the story, and he in black and white. And then what led to Shivers and Rabid were truly kind of intestinal, mental conglomeration of plot ideas. I learned later, I found out later that he had a Bachelor of Science. That's when he was in university at U of T, University of Toronto. He was a science major, and a lot of his films, I would say most of his films, it isn't a car chase movie, unlike Fast Company, but there's always a scientific procedure, whether it's scanners or the brood, psychoplasmics, or a metempsychosilin from biocarbon amalgamate. All of these, certainly The Fly is the ultimate scientific thing that goes wrong. In all of his films, which I'll share with you, I feel are similar to the plot of The Fly, in that the hero becomes a victim of a scientific procedure that goes wrong and dies. Uh, Scanners are a little different because they kind of exchange brains and eyeballs and all that sort of stuff. But this was scientific and slash horror entertainment, and David knew how to put it all together.
Again, it is interesting to see that kind of through line throughout not potentially like almost all of his films. And as a filmmaker, when you signed on to do Fast Company, was it, and you'd had this experience with all these other films, was that just kind of a immediate like about face of we're doing a car film with this guy? Did that seem strange at the time, or were you just like, this is gonna be fine?
Yeah, in a sense that I was now capable of not only seeing behind the curtain, but I was behind the curtain as well, and watching this guy who was somewhat, I was fan geeking over him, but I was watching. It's like shooting a commercial directed by Steven Spielberg. You don't care what the product is; you want to see how he makes a film. And I tell people, certainly through the A.S.C and our master classes of mentoring, I tell them every day in a film set, it's free film school. Don't sit there on your phone. Watch how it works. Watch how the director, everyone comes together. So that was what I was watching with David. I was lucky in the sense that I had worked with the star of Fast Company, a guy called Bill Smith. He was also the star of Blood and Guts. And, William Smith, who was a big kind of muscular Hollywood character actor. And watching the dynamics, in fact, I was in the lobby of this hotel. I met Bill before I met David the first day I kind of was flown, rescued, parachuted in. And Bill was talking about this fucking, I don't know, these guys, they make these horror films. I don't know what the fuck this director is. And David is now standing behind him. And I'm trying to, excuse me, pardon me. So that's how they met. A little meet, not so cute. But for sure, working with David was a way to see the craft of filmmaking, the art of filmmaking, and the nuts and bolts of filmmaking. In this case, one of the few films he's done in which he did not write the script. So I was then learning how he interpreted, and would learn later on The Dead Zone. He interpreted other people's material and kind of made it his own.
All right, and just jumping in, because I am so curious to see behind the curtain. What was your process like working with him? Just how would, as a cinematographer, how would you work with him? Would he kind of storyboard or shot list, or did you have discussions? Like, how did it work?
To be honest, David was very, and I understood completely, vehemently opposed to storyboards, absolutely against storyboards and shot lists. And the reason was simple. First of all, with storyboards, he'd say, quite simply, how would a cartoonist know where I want to put the camera? I don't know where I want to put the camera. Same with shot lists. It's an abstract kind of, I don't know, mission you're on to see what you've written on the page and then turn that into specific shots. So many times, especially with David, a producer would ask for storyboards and then say, well, 27, shot 27B, you really need that one? Because you have 25 and 20, and I don't think you, so suddenly this is a mechanical issue rather than a creative issue. Wes Craven, completely different. Storyboards, shot lists, do this. Don't question it. So David's outlook was simple. And I assume he is this way till this day. It's been 40 years since I worked on The Fly. He did not want any, he wanted the actors and myself and the script supervisor on the set. And everyone else on the crew had to leave, not only if we were in a location, leave the house, the building we were on stage, go outside, go to craft service, or in Toronto it was the coffee truck. And then he would run the scene and block it and see it, let it grow. And then I would write the shot list, and then we'd shoot it in that particular order. He didn't want the first AD. He didn't want the gaffer and the key grip and the boom man watching, is it ready? Is it soup yet? No. That is how he allowed the dramatic elements of a film to evolve into the mechanical aspects of the film. The camera goes here. Chris Walken comes up the stairs. We push in. He looks out the window. He lays on the couch. You can't write that on a storyboard if you haven't been to the location. And the cartoonist has definitely not been to the location. So storyboards are helpful in that they're a mind exercise. I call them mental push-ups, but they in fact turn you away from what's in front of you. And I've had people say, yeah, but it says here, you stand there. Why are you standing there? So, okay, then flip it around. Maybe I can make this work. And I just put it in your back pocket, dude. This is the thought process. Now it's a creative process. Don't get caught with thinking that you drew a cartoon and therefore you know how to direct. And Wes was completely dedicated to his structure. He didn't want any input from me. 35 mil right here. Okay, well, what would you think we dolly in and boom down? No, 35 mil. Okay, but she comes down the staircase and we're low. We can, no, just here. Okay, paint by number. So that's when I become a non-participant. I am now the lighting director, setting shots and lighting the shot, and contributing to the shot, the story, all of that kind of mosaic of how a story's told. I'm sorry, we don't need that. With David, it was completely the opposite. And he wanted my involvement the same way he wanted Carol Spear as the production designer. his sister as a costume designer. Everybody came in after that point, but not ahead of time. Does that make
That
sense?
makes perfect sense. And honestly, there's so many people these days that seem to really harp on like doing the storyboard over, like over preparing every little thing. And I get it from a budgetary standpoint, but the sense of allowing something to grow organically, I mean, for Cronenberg, yes, but I don't know, it's just fascinating that approach to filmmaking seems like it's almost going by the wayside in terms of what people expect these days. I don't know.
And it's like, to me, I have the comparison that I have is it's like bricklaying versus jazz. And if you're a competent jazz player, then you have the freedom to take this mode somewhere else or this key transition, other than okay, this next shot, lay the bricks. It becomes very utilitarian. And God knows I worked with every kind of director. I've shot a Jackie Chan film in Hong Kong. There's a different world out there. So nobody gets to say, well, it has to be done this way. I need all those shots listed up front. A producer will want to say that because they want to control things. But remember, this was at a time when there was a viewfinder, a camera, a lens, an actor, and then the back of my head. Nobody knew what the shot was till the next day. Now, in the 21st century, you've got a 27-inch monitor in a Video Village tent filled with other monitors and people, and now you can judge everything. You don't have to wonder. You don't have to say, well, what's this? What you need this list? I don't want to see these shots. Okay, now I see it coming together. And quite often we will, and this is now the trend, to do a oneer, unlike adolescence, where the whole show, whole hour is one shot, which is not to me a bridge too far, but it's what I call look at me lighting, look at me shooting. Uh, Especially when you have a two shot and you're obliged to break it down and travel around, like that scene with the teacher where he kind of goes crazy. The kid, I think, in the second episode. But that's the purpose of coverage, to see people's eyes. You have a two shot. Okay, now I have profiles. Let's come around to see eyes. Uh, so there's a upside and a downside to being creative when it comes to that. I personally think that the Goodfellas shot was kind of threw down the gauntlet and said, "Okay, what's next?" Okay, we'll do a whole movie like that. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'll stop there. I have many axes to grind.
No, it's all good. I love hearing it. Okay, I'll jump back in. So after Fast Company, you do The Brood with Cronenberg, and that obviously is much more typical of him, but also it's a much more personal project. And did that feel like kind of cooler once you got in there? Like, oh, okay, now we're in the wheelhouse. We don't have to shoot cars. We can shoot like something really interesting. Or was it
The Brood? Yeah. So what was interesting in this? It was a very hot summer in Edmonton to shoot Fast Company. Then I went off to Italy to do a film for CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and then came back, and it was now back in Toronto where the leaves were just falling. It was cold. Winter was coming. It had that different feel completely. And The Brood itself was not an action film. In many ways, it was an inaction film that people waited and watched. Things happened to people. There were internal transitions and external manifestation. It was a lot of the complications that that's a normal, plateau for him. Let's not crash cars. Let's not blow up buildings. Let's just get internal. And Oliver Reed was a huge part of that. That he was this mountain of a man as well as a performer. And what David ended up drawing through Art Hindle was his own. I guess he was also purging his own angst with his. It was a retelling of his story about his ex-wife taking his daughter away from Toronto across the border to California and then going to let's just call it a cult. It was some sort of synanon kind of place in Northern California. And David saying, and you can't do this now, that's for sure. Flew to Los Angeles, rented a car, drove to this place, got Cassandra and his daughter, got on a plane, came back to Toronto. And if there's nothing else, I'm going to make a film about that. Well, he did that, those activities while he was making Shivers and Rabid. And David's always had that kind of tormented side. Um, we all grew up in the same area in Southern Ontario, which has the Great Lakes everywhere. So there was a pretty common thing on a sunny day, the kids to go walking on the beach, just getting into trouble, skipping stones on the water. So I had this image of myself and a bunch of my buddies and my cousins and David, and we're all kids walking along the beach, all picking up stones, trying to find the flattest one, throwing it. And David is the one kid who picks up a stone. Oh, what's that gooey thing underneath it? Oh, and now he starts examining the worms or whatever it is that's underneath this stone. And we're all outside in the sunshine, and he's looking into the darkness underneath the stone that he isn't even throwing. He just tosses it away and examines the inner workings of some dark and shadowy place. That's the image I got with David later on in life. And it was a very simplified thing, but the Brood was definitely a story that looked into the shadows. Yet again, it was something that was centered around a nouveau scientific behavioral science. I guess it wasn't a cult as much as yeah, I think it was a cult actually. And Ollie played the cult leader, and the whole manifestation of the psychoplasmics that you could work it out on the outside of your body. And so the ectopic pregnancy that Samantha Eggar had the side effect of growing this troop, this brood of children who would respond to her mental commands because she was their mother. So he was introducing a lot of new age themes, a lot of gothic themes. Yes, mother, I will respond, classic monster stuff. So we shot it. The purpose of this was, and I've always felt this way, if you're going to scare somebody, in the first act, don't put them in the dark. Show them everywhere that's safe and sound. And then later on, we're going to turn the lights off and scare the shit out of you. So if you start too dark, there's nowhere to go. And plus audiences, and for that matter, theaters will say, yeah, okay, I can see the dark. We're not going to make it that dark. So it just becomes suspiciously uninformative. I want this to be a place that's safe. And now, Daddy, what's happening? And then you travel. And David knew how to make that journey. He was not afraid of anything. It really wasn't. In terms of broad performance, because Ollie was a larger than life character, and Samantha was very subdued, and she was kind of anchored on the spot. She never leaves that nest in the psychoplasmic kind of retreat. The inside joke was that she started birthing babies and tearing the placenta off with her teeth. And of course, everything was artificial, including the blood, which was made out of corn syrup. In America, it's called Karo syrup for some reason, but it was dyed to look like blood. And take after take, this blood would pour everywhere. And slowly, this is first thing in the morning till lunch was at 1 o'clock. Slowly, this puddle of blood crystallized and turned into a candy apple, a Samantha apple. And now she couldn't get out. She couldn't move. Okay, that's lunch. Help me. So then it took an hour with warm water and sponges and all kinds of stuff to break her free from this. So the inside of the scary scene is an actress who turns into a candy apple.
I just have to ask, as a film geek and hearing a lot of stories about him, what was it like working with Oliver Reed?
Yes. Well, I did two films with Ollie. I got to know him very well. I'd worked in England for a while, and we shared, pubs and different things. Oh yeah, right, mate. One secret that I learned that I guess he took to his grave, but it was evident to all of us. For example, David, as a writer, would rewrite, and at the night before he came in the morning, here's some new pages, and Ollie would go bananas. All my years at RADA, this is completely unprofessional. You colonials, oh, bloody hell. Go on and on and on. it turned out he had a bodyguard who also was his stand-in, a guy called Alf, who was many things, but definitely someone who knew all the secrets about Oliver Reed. And one of the secrets that he knew, and the word wasn't used in the 70s, was that Ollie was autistic.
Mm.
He could not read or did not read very well. So what he would do as a performer was he had the pages the night before. He would study everything. He knew everybody's lines, including his. So the whole dynamics of the scene was kind of in him rather than just, quite often now you work with actors who learn while they earn, and they have some folded sides and they just kind of fake their way through a stumble block. And then 3 takes later, they've kind of performed it. Ollie was fully charged, ready to go. The problem was when he got new pages, he would go bananas. So then he would take time to go to his trailer, throw a hissy fit. But Alf finally revealed to me that, yeah, he was learning the new lines. It's not like, oh, I can, sure, no problem. It was a big problem. Ollie had this, he called himself the whispering giant, and he had this very strong voice. It was never quite, he didn't emote like Olivier. He was someone who kind of growled. And he learned this. He learned 2 things from his uncle, Sir Carroll Reed, who was a famous theater and then film director. He learned he had to be unique, and that ghostly growl, he also called it, that was part of it. The other thing that Ollie learned from Sir Carroll Reed, and he was a couple of generations late for social media, but his uncle told him to get his name in the newspaper. Whatever you do, keep your name alive in the newspaper. And the only way to get your name in the newspaper was to pick a fight with somebody, have a barroom brawl, whether it's in England or the one just before The Brood was in Vermont, on a film he was on, had a rap party, got drunk, punched everybody out, got arrested, and got in the news. Just if it's the AP wire, but that made him famous. He got in the news before we started shooting on The Brood. And anyone who knows Toronto knows where Harry Rosen is, and then the Four Seasons, which is now a different building, but they were more or less connected with a kind of walkway. It was, but all indoors. He was in Harry Rosen's getting different suits and this and that, changing his pants. He was just at the end of the day, oh, bloody hell. And he wasn't, he was not wearing pants. He was wearing a suit and tie, or a jacket and tie, and I believe certainly shoes and socks, but he was sick of changing his pants back and forth. So he walked from Harry Rosen's about 100 feet through this Galleria area to the lobby of the hotel. That turned into headlines. Oliver Reed arrested for running naked down Bloor Street. Yeah, okay. The news is not all that new when it's not true, but Ollie didn't mind it. At the end of the shoot, same deal. Not running naked, though. We had a rap party at the Inn on the Park, I think, and we were all waiting with the rap party in the top floor that had a big view of University Avenue in Toronto. And Ollie, where's Ollie? Where's Ollie? He finally shows up, and he's all torn up. He's got, he's been in a fist fight, and he's drunk as a skunk. Oh, those bloody eye ties. We've been to an Italian restaurant and beat up everybody, and they beat him up. Finally, he struggles his way to the elevator and falls into this party. That was Ollie. I knew what was going on. I did a film with him later where I learned more. But one thing he warned me doing this film was that he said, you see, Mark, sometimes if I get tired, my eyes cross a little bit. They just cross a little bit. And so I keep an eye out for that. And when you're in the 14th hour, everyone's eyes are going cross-eyed, but we're not on camera. And so I had one set up for his close-up, and he was just, what's his name? Joe Turpin, the silent movie star whose eyes are permanently crossed. So I suggested we do a profile instead of a head-on. Little things like that. He was an interesting guy, and he very, very, very watchful. But a lot of his fears in life were dealt with through alcohol. He didn't put his career in a bottle, but he put his kind of credibility in a bottle. And then he was one of the bad boys. He and Richard Harris and Peter O'Toole, and they would all go drinking, and they kept their names in the paper. At the end of The Brood, by the way, when he he goes to find he goes to the brood, the bunkhouse, and there are rows and rows and rows in this dark kind of cabin, and the broodlets, they're inside all of them, and they're waiting for the command from Samantha Eggar to attack or not attack. These were all young girls, 6 years old. They were in a gymnastics club, so they were the right size. They put on the Dr. Denton's outfits, and that outfit fine. They had masks with the hood on, and so they were still little girls. They were a little freaked because the masks were glued with wax and different things, so they didn't come off. So these kids had trouble eating anything because the mask was not to be taken off. Okay. And then Ollie kind of blocks this scene, and all these kids, and he smells like a brewery, and he's totally raving. And all these girls are, Jesus, we don't want to go near. So David, try again. And the AD's a little more. And he leaned, no. So in the end, we draped Duvetine on the back of all of these bunks and slid them out of the, and every girl's parent was in hiding in the shadow with their eyes poking through in the Duvetine. And then Ollie would come by and they'd force their kid forward. And the unlucky ones did not get to interact with Ollie. None of them were, they were all afraid to jump on him. So he would kind of grab these kids like an octopus and use them as props to smack him in the face. It was everyone gets to the 14th, 15th hour, you think, okay, this isn't funny anymore. But that part was funny. I don't know if those kids grew up scarred, twisted, and afraid of the dark, but that was a night worth remembering.
Oh goodness, that's hilarious. Just jumping back quickly, was that kind of a thing Cronenberg would do? Would he rewrite constantly? Okay, how would that kind of affect your work, or were you just like ready to roll?
Yeah, what he didn't rewrite was the location. You know what the actor said, or how as he got all the actors got tuned to the story and he got tuned to them. He would see, like in the Dead Zone, Walken and I'm blanking on her name, who played.
I think it's Brooke Adams.
Brooke Adams, yeah. He saw the dynamics there and wanted to take advantage of it. And something he wrote a year ago, he said, "Well, yeah, this is something different. Let me embellish that." With the Brood, it was a little different in the sense that he had a very flexible producer, ironically from French Canada, a guy called Claude Héroux, who had worked on other films that David had done, and he was kind of the godfather of French Canadian filmmaking. Which is to say, if something was rewritten in English, he didn't really. I won't say he didn't understand, but it wasn't. David was kind of a genius, so well, let's let the genius do genius things, make it better, and that's how the pages. And they weren't rewrites; they were embellishments and sharpening and a tweak here and a polish there. A lot of the locations where we shot, and all the locations in which we shot, never changed. That because that's what he wrote. It happens in this weird cabin. It happens in this kitchen where the broodlet comes down and it goes crazy. That we scout those locations, pre-light them, go and shoot. But the interaction with the words, the characters, and the plot in some ways, that's what he kept tweaking. Because once you've shot it and leave the location, you can't go back. You can't rewrite and say, I was thinking, let's go back to that night exterior by the river with the smoke and the flame. No, that's not going to happen.
Oh man, that's again, jumping back to that whole notion of very strict storyboarding method of filmmaking these days. It actually feels kind of refreshing and more practical to be like, okay, this is working, let's push it this way. And I don't know, it feels like no one's willing to take the time, but in that it's almost this kind of method feels kind of demonized, like reading up on it and it's like, oh man, that seems like it might be difficult. So it's now refreshing to hear that it was just in service of making everything stronger and better. And I don't know, just a cool thing.
It's also the power and the potency of discovery.
Mm.
If you've written something a year later, you're shooting it, and you see something happening on the screen and say, but it says here, you've discovered something. Take advantage of that, because now in other words, you've got something that's a 1 year old stale. Let's freshen it up. I've discovered this. Let's make this work. And the actors are the same way. So in most cases, the actors don't want to question what's on the page, but that's the Broadway term. What's on the page, it's on the stage. So let's change what's on the page. And it's not that hard to rewrite, especially if he wrote the screenplay to begin with. He envisioned the plot. He lived the story. In the case of The Brood, it wasn't like someone else. Yeah, you're upset now with your daughter and your ex-wife. No, no, no. He was that guy, and he was not. It wasn't an academic perspective. It was a visceral, personal perspective. And so to rewrite something based on the dynamics between Art Hindle and Samantha Eggar, yeah, let's tweak a few words, or maybe the timing is different. Maybe we start the scene with her and pull back and reveal that he's there. All these things, that is what you discover. And myself, as a documentary filmmaker, like everybody starts, you end up having 3 rolls of film to help. That's 30 minutes of 16 millimeter, and you've got to get all the coverage for a 15-minute movie. And I was happy to run and gun because I'm constantly watching. That's why all the films I ever did, including now, I don't use an operator. I'm always operating a camera. I'm not sitting behind the Cyclops, which is the image from a camera. If you're there physically and kind of three-dimensionally, you can see on an actor's face if it's Bill Murray or if it's Oliver Reed. And I'm seeing outside the Cyclops. And now I can be inspired and by discovering the dynamics of these people. Their performance isn't just blah, 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 cut. The lighting follows someone's emotion, and they may block the scene like this and then do the scene like this. And then I have to be ready and modulate my lighting to match the mood of the scene, whether it's someone like Jennifer O'Neill, who stabbed me on Scanner. She kept playing a scene more and more like this, and I kept moving the key around. This is just an aside about Scanners, but I'll finish the thought. That was the first day of shooting. Second day of shooting, that night we go to see Daly's, and as much as I tried to light her face, she kept trying to put her face into shadow. In Daly's, this was at a lab in Montreal. We're looking at her footage. She stands up with in the whole audience in the screening room and says, and in the dark points to me and says, "That man gave me raccoon eyes. Look, I have raccoon eyes. Shadow, raccoon eyes. I want this man fired." Oh yeah, okay, thanks. 2 days into my third film with David, and now on Quebec, and I'm getting fired. So this is where I knew I had a future with David. Okay, thanks everybody. We'll screen these tomorrow. Everyone leaves. Just myself and Claude and David. And David kind of broke the brittle ice and said, "Okay, I understand, Jennifer. I understand the whole thing. I understand that Mark is going to leave, and I want you to understand that I want to know what plane he's going to be on. I'll be on the same one." Oh, okay. So that's when it goes. Yeah, it goes beyond a cinematic partnership or whatever to a commitment. And so that I was lucky I didn't get fired, but I was unlucky in the sense that I had 9 weeks and 3 days on a set with Jennifer O'Neill, who not only hated me, but her fourth husband was on the set, and his profession was that he was a dog trainer. He attack trained Alsatians and Malinois. So on the set, I would be at the viewfinder, and this guy would be right here, right behind my head. There was no monitor. And the dog was on the set in front of the camera looking up at me the whole time. So it was very odd. I'll just complete that thought with Jennifer O'Neill. It won't take long. The last day of shooting, we are in the Italian pavilion at the former Expo 67 site in Montreal. And there's been redressed the whole scene at the end where the heads explode and eyeballs blow out and everything like that, which we reshot in the summertime. This was now Christmas Eve and everyone was freezing. but everyone was handing out gifts to each other. And I spent the whole 9 weeks. Please tell Miss O'Neill to move an inch to her left, not physically or in any way connecting with her. Everyone's handing out gifts. So I give Jennifer this big, huge box, all gift wrap. And she looked at it and said, "You cameramen with your bounce cards and your umbrellas and your fog filters, you don't know anything about beauty." And she's just chewing me a new asshole, thinking, okay, I can hit and run. And this is a crew in Quebec where everyone speaks French and nobody speaks English, apparently. Suddenly, the whole grid, everything is dead silent. They're all looking down and listening in English to her chewing me out. And I said, "What?" In French, I told him, "I thought you guys didn't understand English. Get back to work." Anyway, to make a long story short, inside the box was a giant stuffed raccoon, stuffed animal, and with a card on it saying, "Dear Jennifer, I only have eyes for you. Merry Christmas, Mark." So I don't imagine that had much effect. It was not like the stiletto to the heart kind of thing, but made me feel good. So anyway, let's go back to where you were. That was my scanner's side journey.
All right. So we might as well get into scanners now since we're already here. But before we jump in fully, I just wanted to ask briefly about, obviously there's a weird method of the film being funded. Like it was like some kind of tax shelter fund or something that like presented some complications. Like what kind of happened there? Like how did that work? Was that normal for film in Canada, or was this a very specific thing?
Oh no, I'll give you the backstory because what had happened when we shot The Brood is that investment was a somewhat I don't want to say amateur thing, but it wasn't like a federally run program. It certainly went starting in the 70s, earlier 70s with Starship Invasions and things like that. There was a kind of small clause that allowed you to invest in a movie, 50,000, and you could write off 100,000, which is great for people with 50,000. They want to up their tax deduction. What it meant, though, was that everyone was scrambling around to find on an individual level with your producer and kind of the executive producer trying to line up people who want to invest. Now, that usually comes at the end of the year, the fourth quarter, which meant October, November, December. And then they would hustle together all these people, and literally this, chiropractors, dentists, oral surgeons, one guy who owned a chain of car washes. This was kind of the scrambling, the rough and tumble scrambling of financing a film, which is not a studio film at all in Canada. These were all independent films. They weren't called independent films, just a Canadian film. I remember shooting one film next to the director, looking over at him, and he's looking around like this, and to the producer who does this, and we got the chiropractors, we got an extra 20,000. It was crazy. So it was all very catch and carry, like scrambling. When Bay Street, which is the equivalent of Wall Street, the finance center of Toronto and Canada, when they learned about this, they said, "Well, we can't do it this way." They know how to separate money from everybody. We need to restructure this so this is played by our rules. So year by year, they would fiddle with the tax code because God knows people with money and people in government somehow have this magic connection to change the rules so that rich people get richer. And that's exactly what happened. On The Brood, it was almost in place, 1978. But by 1979, it had gone from trying to guys who own car washes to give you $25,000 to stockbrokers on Bay Street hustling other stockbrokers, expand this portfolio, give me, $500,000, write off $1 million. Oh, great. So suddenly people who are way, way up in bank towers were financing films that they didn't even, it used to be that the chiropractors would come to the premiere of the film. They were so excited to meet Oliver Reed and come to the set, now it was just business. So 1979, I shot a film in Puerto Rico. I shot a series in Toronto. I shot another film called Funeral Home, and then shot Scanners. Those were all capital cost allowance, tax investment, tax shelter movies, and that's how things grew from the hands and knees kind of give me lend me a dollar to here's a million. Don't spend it all in one place. So Scanners was kind of the pinnacle of that kind of climb, and then the plateau was making movies on a industrial scale from that point on. What it meant, though, was that suddenly, oh, we got the money, we got to go. Oh, David had to write it, completely write it. And we were now shooting at the fourth quarter when everyone had that money to invest, even up in the bank towers. They had millions to invest, but they didn't know until the end of the third quarter. Okay, I made this much. I'm going to roll these assets over, all highfalutin talk for filmmakers who just want to start shooting. And it meant, for me particularly, that October, November, December are colder and coldest when it comes to shooting. The fall, everyone loves an Indian summer, but it doesn't start until October. But now the leaves are turning. Now the leaves are blown away. Now the frost is coming. Now the snow comes in. I got to shoot in it all that time. So so that was how David got Scanner. We all landed on this. Let's go, let's go, let's go kind of momentum about Scanners. First week of shooting was David was writing every night while we were rewriting and in essence creating all of the things. What was the name of the amalgam cyclosalin, biocarbon amalgamate? There were all these corporations, and he was purging something and establishing something, and it was great. But in the meantime, well, what are we going to shoot while you're writing? So we ended up shooting a week of car rigs, just driving around with I forget who in the car, the truck. It was all scanner related. I don't think it was ever in the movie, but it turned out that there's more than just writing a script to making a movie. You have to find locations, and you have to cast the actors. So every night we would shoot, we would look at dailies, and then we go to look at 3 or 4 different locations. So your call time is 7 in the morning. Now it's 9 o'clock at night, and you're seeing the third location. And okay, well, let's go back to the second one. I'm not sure about this, back and forth. So by midnight, every night, David and Carol and the production designer and the set decorator and myself, we'd all agreed on this location. And then they would spend the rest of the night painting it and dressing it and bring in furniture, whatever they did. So all the scenes where everyone's sitting in those white folding chairs and they're kind of getting brainwaved by Patrick McGoohan, who came in late to the event, very late, in fact. But that was how it went. It wasn't like, see you tomorrow. It was like, see you in 3 hours. That was a brutal, brutal shoot. But ultimately, exhaustion is no excuse when I was only 28, so I could do it.
And again, I've heard and read stories of just how kind of chaotic that shoot was. Like stories of even like scenes being like unfinished and found in like the edit with like, oh, this the background in this shot is fairly similar to this shot. Let's just, kind of piece it together. I've also heard stories of like Michael Ironside allegedly only showed up for like a day of work and then ended up becoming the main villain of the film. Is this stuff that's just kind of blown out of proportion? Okay.
Oh yeah, I mean, what you're saying about editing and piecing together, that's just normal filmmaking. Mm-hmm. There is always chaos to a civilian, a writer who walks in, oh, they're running around with cables and lights. Well, that happens all day, dude. Come back at night, see how many more cables and lights we have. Get used to it. We were all used to it. And that's I joke and say, well, that's why they call it the movies. We keep moving shit around. So don't pretend that this is a breakthrough or everyone's hair is on fire. These are the dynamics. And in some ways, there are some directors who enjoy chaos because people change and they rise to the occasion. And that's what I was looking for when I pull the rug from underneath you and you're floating in midair like Wile E. Coyote. That's what I was looking for. David was not that person. very, very dignified and regulated. What he wrote is what we would deal with the actors. And by the way, Mike Ironside, whose real name is Fred, he was written into the whole script. It wasn't like, well, we elevated this extra and he became the star of the show. That was not the case at all. He was integral, obviously, with the family link to Stephen Lack and the hole in his head, all that stuff. He wasn't a day player that got lucky. No, he was an integral part of the story. But I can see people wanting to take pot shots at someone, or I don't know if there's any ill will toward David. I certainly don't feel it, but there is now with social media, you can say whatever you want, and I saw it on Facebook, I saw it on Instagram, so it must be true. None of that is true whatsoever.
And that's good to know, because it seems like of late there's been kind of a narrative that's developed around the chaotic production of the film. And then again, hearing more about how Cronenberg operated with like kind of thinking on his feet constantly, and also dealing with the craziness of the funding of the film and just having to go at a certain point. It feels more like a miracle of just, we're just going to get it. We're going to pull it off. And
I guess, certainly in terms of funding, this was becoming the new normal. And Canada was leaving behind its scrappy, now they're called indie films, but that's all what a Canadian film was, just low budget or no budget, and we made it all happen. So now Claude Leroux and all the partners in Filmplan ended up elevating David to this different point. And Scanners was a huge financial success, primarily because they found the money you want Peter O'Toole, we can't get him, we can get you Patrick McGoohan. Oh, so you went from strength to strength. It wasn't like, well, we'll get you some B player, a Canadian sitcom actor. No, everything was done exactly the way David wanted it done, in a place that was, I don't know, this was like, I think we were the third film of that year in Quebec, same production company, same working crew. I inherited a crew, ironically, from René Verzier from a film called Gas that was all about the gas crisis, the oil crisis, and lots of explosions and stuff like that. I took his crew and put them on my show on Scanners. It's great to have legends, and here's the truth behind it. Everyone gets it's all for clickbait, but I'm here to say that David knew what he was doing, and we just did it, and that's always an advantage. There's no question that the writer is also the director, and has a firm control of all the characters and the portrayal of them all. And Stephen Lack was, I think, probably the weakest link in the story. I believe most of his voice was dubbed, but a lot of the supporting cast, Larry Dane, the bad guy, everyone was put together with precision. And when you write something, you can find the right person to say the words you wrote, and it'll look like the person that you described in your script. So that was great.
So when you were starting this film, I assume this kind of felt like a big step up just in terms of budget. Like, even I think Dick Smith was brought in for effects at one point for the film. When you were making it, did it feel like, oh, we're up in the game here, like this is bigger than normal, or was it just, let's get to it?
There's one thing about Canadians, I think, humility, for me, certainly, the biblical thought that pride cometh before a fall. So if you start thinking bigger and bigger about your swelled head kind of thing, then it's leading to disaster. So nobody's tiptoeing around. We just know what the job has to be done, and let's just do it. Certainly that's the mythology. You got a huge budget. You have all this money. Well, all the money in any film, even today, goes to the actors. It doesn't go to the crew. It doesn't go to the lighting budget. It doesn't go to how many, you can't have that many crane days. All the things that make a movie, a motion picture, are now relegated below the line. So whether it was Jennifer O'Neill and Mike Ironside and Stephen Lack and uh, Patrick McGoohan, that the audience only cares about two things: who's in it and what's it about. So apparently, all those ingredients satisfied an audience because this was a huge hit. In the winter, I guess the spring of 1980, we shot it in the winter right up to New Year's Eve, 1970 time. That's when the tax write-off fell apart. So you had to shoot this much. You can't go. So there was always the let's go, let's go, let's go kind of thing. Not only that, in French and English. So you had to shoot everything. Um, David was such a pro. He always likes cracking jokes and punning a lot. And this is a guy from English Canada who would speak French and then crack jokes and pun in French. So the crew, everybody was behind him every step of the way. But I don't think that's any different. I've seen a few occasions where directors get kind of deep-sixed and fragged by their own crew because they're so arrogant or impetuous. But David was not that person. And he knew this was whatever step we were taking, he was taking it as well. He'd gone from Shivers and Rabid, both in Montreal, to two films in English Canada, one in the prairies in Edmonton, one in Toronto, his hometown, and now he's back where the money is, in Montreal, with a kind of prepackaged crew, production design, set decorators. It was myself and the production designer and David. We were the only guys from, I had a focus puller and a key grip from English Canada. The rest were all French Canadian. And that wasn't like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Incredible technicians there and still are. But for David and all of us to think, well, this is a huge leap up. No, man, it's minus 20. It's snowing. We got to clear away the snow, shoot this night exterior before the sun comes up, and just, nose to the wheel and push. Pousser. Come on, dis en français.
Okay, so jumping back into Scanners, we've obviously we've discussed the scale of the film and how there wasn't much ego involved in that. So I just wanted to ask, because this film comes out and it has a pretty tremendous reception. It's even it was the #1 film in America for a couple of weeks at least. I believe so. I know it was a hit down here. I assume it was a hit up there, and obviously is kind of a launch pad for bigger films for that. I'm just gonna assume that this still kind of rolled off of your backs in terms of okay, yeah, that happened. What's the next one?
In some ways, it was. I guess it was a bit of a surprise that it was a rough and tumble shoot in French and English, which is always a challenge to get what you want through another person's vocabulary as well as their attitude about it. But for sure, it was not like this was a French film where people talked about romance. This was a hard-hitting thing. And for David, it was a very, very commercial film. I don't know if he's taken this to his grave, but I know David was not a big fan of what he calls market movies, and Scanners was definitely that. Mm-hmm. Most of the films that he's done, he didn't like. Of the films he recently did, the last 25 years, History of Violence, which is his most popular, most successful. It's a market movie. He hated it. So Scanners perhaps was his introduction to the mainstream. And I remember in Toronto when I was getting ready to move to Hollywood and, hopefully work both sides of the border. I said, when are you going to move to Hollywood? And he said, man, if I move to Hollywood, I'll just be another Berg. But that's where it ended. Mm. That thought process, it wasn't but it was no. I guess it would be unfair to talk about Scanners and not mention The Exploding Head, which I believe is what drew people in. That was definitely the kind of key for the advertising campaign. There wasn't a lot of people marching around and talking and wearing or getting inside giant heads and blowing people. In other words, the trailer took out all the hot spots and said, this is what the movie's about. And in many ways it was. This is where I, as a Canadian, I knew this was as rough and tumble as it gets. We shot the whole lead up to that brainwaving, exploding head scene in what are called CEGEPs, which are community colleges. This one was in Verdun, Quebec, and famous for other things, but this was just the amphitheater and the stage, and that was all shot right there. Then we took Louis Del Grande was an American actor, another draft dodger who lived and worked in Canada, and he was the guy whose head blew up. And they made 3 statues of him in this kind of grimacing position, kaboom. So the whole story would lead to him going like that live, and then we'd leave the CEGEP and shoot that another time. The effects people, very, very experienced and inspired effects people who ended up working on The Fly. Stéphane Dupuis was one of the members of that team that he ended up winning an Oscar with Wheelhouse for The Fly a couple of years later. So they made these creatures or not creatures, a duplicate of it. And the special effects guy, not the visual effects, special effects guy was a guy called Gary Zeller, who was a New Yorker who always wore combat gear. And you fucking Frenchmen, you fucking Canadians, you know, any shit. Here's a guy who wore combat gear, had a scar that went through his nose and his lip and down like that. Ah, Vietnam. Okay, great. So he was in charge of blowing things up. And they had 3 of these creatures, pre-wired all of them with squibs. And take one, this was in a very, very cold warehouse down by the harbor in Montreal, Port of Montreal. And we brought all the trucks inside, and they just happened to be there, set up 3 cameras, a Mitchell R35, which was 128 frames. That's the one that ended up being used, and other Panavision and the Aries that go as fast as they could. Lit it for high speed, and action blew it up. The head blew up, but this giant spark and smoke came out of it. That was the squib that blew it up. And David said, I don't like the smoke. I don't like the flash. And Zeller said, well, you cut those frames out. No, I don't want to cut any frames out. Can you blow this up without any smoke? Oh, yeah. So, and it's already pre-wired. Take 2, same effect. It blows up great, but the smoke, they put a fan on it so the smoke didn't go up. It went sideways, but it still was there. And David said, no, that's not. So we had one more take, one more chance. And so Zeller got pissed off, and he said, okay. Here's what I want you camera guys to do. Start all your camera, everyone on the set, get well out of the way. Just find some shelter. The camera guys, roll your cameras and get inside your trucks and close the window so you can see. And he crawled behind this critter. It was like 3/4 of a body at a table, put a double-barreled shotgun on the back of his head and blew the brains out. No squib, no explosive, no flash, just brains everywhere. And that is what you see in the movie. But Pierre David, so dailies, that was on a Saturday night, Sunday morning. We see those dailies Monday night after the first day of shooting the next week. And take 1, flash, smoke. Take 2, less smoke, lots of flash. Take 3, perfect. And the French Canadian crew, everyone's high-fiving and going crazy. And Pierre David, who was kind of the specialist when it came to marketing, stood up and he's waving his hands and with the exploding brains projected on his face. No, we have to reshoot this. What? We'll get an X. We can't show this. We'll get an X. We can't. So a week later, we're back in the same warehouse, same deal, no squibs, all shotgun. We know the routine, roll the cameras, run and hide, look through the window. Bam! First take was mint jelly, green jelly flying out. Oh, c'est dommage, pardon. Oh, and they complain about the formula. Okay. So, encore une fois, 2 exemples, 2 more. The next one is, what was it? Oh, it was confetti. That's what, just whoosh, paper flying everywhere in slow motion. Oh, c'est dommage, pardon. The third one was just a solid head of plaster, just broke apart like the head was made out of granite. And the French guys, they were not going to redo it. They were going to live and die for the one that we ended up seeing in the movie, which did not get an X. So yes, that was very Canadian and very kind of lowbrow, low budge, but very. None of us had any idea that this would go beyond Quebec and Canada. And when it got reviewed well, and then all theater chains want is a movie to put bums in seats so they can sell the popcorn and high priced sugar water. So that whole chain of money, money, money started in these little sets and exploding head warehouses in Montreal. Nobody knew.
And when you look back on Scanners, how do you feel about it? And do you have a particular moment or just a day on set that you're particularly proud of? Like just something that you did that you're like, all right, that worked out better than expected.
Well, there's a lot of them. I guess I could distill it down to one, and that was when I guess it was a hit squad who was going to find the artist who was now in a kind of barn studio out in the snow in Northern Quebec. And oh man, what was his name? Robert. What was his name? Yeah, Robert Silverman. He was from another guy from Toronto, and so he's he's having bad scanning things, and the hitmen are on their way to kill him. We shot this in an actual barn, which is redressed as a studio, and it had this gigantic head, and he kind of retreats inside the head. This was 1979. Those were the days when a crane lived either in Hollywood or in a studio on a concrete floor. We wanted to do a crane shot that started low and boomed up, or one of the two. We milked it as much as we could with that crane. But the crane itself, we had to rent from CBC, put it on a flatbed. It was a stage crane. We had to build a new floor, which like a plywood floor that was all supported to take the weight of this thing. It was huge. It was like 2 tons. And now, you have techno cranes, you have all kinds of cranes that can go up and down, portable, take them apart, put them on a truck. But this was not that day. So I remember everyone grunting and groaning, and David and everyone, Claude, is pushing this crane to get out of the mud, to get in the set. And it was a very much cohesive, all hands on deck kind of thing. In the end, we used the crane as much as we could, and we used it again in the chemical plant where they bottled all of the metempsycholine, which was actually a water treatment plant in another suburb of Montreal. But yeah, I guess the reality is we had equal expectations. The movie was going to be as good as it could be. Whether it became a legend beyond that, or certainly marketed well, that was out of our hands. I don't write them; I just light them. So if it looks good and it's written well, we make a good movie. Then someone has to take it and run with it and distribute it and make zillions. I have no idea. Oh, let's see, how much did the world gross was 14.25 million, or is currently. So the budget itself was 4 million. So I guess that's okay.
That's not bad.
But it started a lot of people's careers. Certainly, Michael Ironside. Patrick McGoohan was already famous for The Prisoner and all the other films he had been in. One thing we learned the hard way with Patrick was that he was a real Irishman. So we had to time out our day based on his the contents of his lunch, which was liquid mostly. So we'd do all these hurry up, and he had all these dramatic things, and then he'd come back from lunch and was weaving all over the place. And oh man, there was another couple of friends he had in Montreal, also Englishmen, who decided that a liquid lunch at a pub, that's how you had lunch in the UK, and so he'd come back drunk. So we realized that in terms of coverage, we would do a master scene and his close-up. and then the next master scene and his close-up, and then come back and harvest the coverage after lunch of the other people. It meant relighting, shifting locations, but yeah, that was a challenge. I remember shooting over shoulders with him, and he was weaving around, so I had ADs holding him in front, and I was over the shoulder, so I didn't see that, and trying to keep him from doing this so that someone was holding his head. It was kind of scary.
Yeah,
That's big time, I guess.
Hollywood, or almost, but
Hollywood in the snow.
I did kind of want to briefly touch back on just Cronenberg's feelings on market films, because I obviously have never heard that, and if you're comfortable kind of getting in that, market film, that just essentially means films meant for an audience, meant to appeal to marketing. And like from the films that you've done, it doesn't really, like, I guess I can see things like The Brood and Scanners in particular being made for a market, but then you get into things like Videodrome, which I don't know what you could potentially call that movie, but I'm just hoping he doesn't view that as a market film.
Yeah, no, I think those were those were Cronin films, we call them, and that was his, because he would conceive them, he would create all the characters and the evil corporations and the conflict there, and then it was his world, that he didn't want to go back to doing commercial films. God knows he was sent scripts from every studio. The Fly was a perfect film for him, that it was a tormented individual who goes through an internal and external journey and ends up changing completely and dies. That to me is the perfect David Cronenberg film. But that was a remake. And luckily, he recarved it a bit, so it wasn't so monolithic as the original one, which was kind of corny when you see it. 1958, like what? But that was David's strength. The same with The Dead Zone. He and Charles, I forget his last name, did a complete rewrite, and a radical rewrite, but it was the same core of the story. But I think the market movies, for example, History of Violence, was too close to the core of what Hollywood movies were, which were, beat 'em up, crash it up, come from outer space. We've had like 20 years of people who've come from the Marvel comic universe into our living rooms, and it's just so repetitive. So I was on a plane with my family coming back from Toronto after Christmas, I don't know how many years ago, and David was, we're going past first class to go to sit with the chickens and goats in economy, and David's in first class with the champagne, and he looks, hey, David, hey, how you doing? Oh, I'll talk to you when we get the luggage. So meet him back after this 5-hour flight, waiting for suitcases. Hey, what's up? How's it going? And he was just in this unhappy mood. And I remember him kind of grinding about fucking Hollywood, fucking market movies. And it turned out he was there to do the ADR and mix on History of Violence, which ended up being a very successful film. Up until then, he'd done Existenz and lots of different films that were Cronin films. This one seemed to veer away from the Cronin core to Hollywood's calling, got to make this movie. And it's no secret that directors would make a movie one for them and then one for me. And Orson Welles and Billy Wilder, that's kind of a history of that. But David, he did not want to go gently into that good night. He fought it the whole way. So now with films like Shrouds and a remake of Crimes of the Future, he was still capable of seeing the world his own way. And no one's going to deny that fact, but he has not left Toronto, and he hasn't become, Bergman really never left Sweden. So and Truffaut never left France. So you can't say, well, why don't you be like them? Well, they are like me. So I don't know. I lucked out in the sense that after The Fly, there was like a 2-year gap trying to put the financing and the whole thing together for a film called Twins, which ended up being renamed Dead Ringers. And it went back and forth. I finally had to had to get a job. I got an offer to shoot in Hollywood on Fright Night Part 2 and then The Blob. And I kept calling David. When I left, I said, the planes fly both directions. Just let me know. Just call me. I'll be there. And so halfway through The Blob, I think it was, he calls and says, like a year later, we got the money. I need you here on Monday. Okay, well, I got 2 more weeks for this show, and then, which was for TriStar, and then I'll be on the plane, I promise. He said, yeah, no, you got to be here on Monday. I'm thinking, what did I miss in terms of prep? But anyway, and back and forth, finally I said, David, I wouldn't leave you to go to Hollywood. Now you expect me to do things in reverse. I've invested in you and invested in them. I'm asking for 2 weeks, and let's make this work. Trying to keep it upbeat. And okay, all right, click. So that was 1988. Never shot a film for David again. That was that. So that's when I have my own story. I guess had I stayed in Toronto, I would not have worked with Wes Craven or Todd Phillips or the Farrelly brothers. So these are adventures. They're not, nobody says, oh, the ladder, it's over there. Just start climbing. No, it's not that at all. If anything, the way up is this climbing wall where you go here. Oh, no, that's not going to work. Okay. Oh, horror film. Okay. Oh, comedies. Yeah. Okay. That's how we get ahead. And I'm glad that the foundation of that climbing wall is Fast Company, The Brood, Scanners, Videodrome, The Dead Zone, and The Fly. Because that was my film school. And I don't know. I don't want to be pompous, but I feel like that's kind of David's film early years, maybe his freshman year at film school, those 7 films we did together. I've done over 200 features, and I learned from all of them. And I'm hoping the ones that David did taught him something as well. So here we are.
Here we are. All right.
We can't get rid of ourselves. If the only thing I would say to young filmmakers who are watching this or could be watching this is to acknowledge that any film you make once you graduate from film school is in fact a graduate class of your film school. You are now in the front row seat. There's no professor, there's no exams. Just watch what the director's doing. And in many ways, help them do it. David was a young master, and I knew him. In many ways, I kind of idolized this English-Canadian filmmaker while I was another English-Canadian filmmaker 6 years his junior. So that particular ladder started with a drag racing movie, but it could be any kind of film for people in the 21st century. In other words, you will never have made it. You're always going to be learning. Don't forget that. I don't need that. I got that. You don't got it. It ain't got you. Keep learning and keep accepting the fact that there is more to learn. And if not that, with the director who's floundering, then you have more to teach. And they will learn. So directors, cinematographers, that's the tightest bond. We're telling a story with pictures. You do the story, I'll do the pictures. And that's why we are kind of like the two spies back to back with guns. We're ready. Got each other's back, That's the film business, and that will never change. AI will never change it. I think we can use AI the same way that, this is going to change everything. What is it? Oh, digital filmmaking. Okay, well, it didn't. 3D, that's going to change everything. And turn back the clock. Color film. Oh, that'll change everything. Sound on film. Are you crazy? So AI is part of it. Actual inspiration is what AI stands for. Nothing artificial about that.
Reel 1 was recorded at Open Stage Media Studios, directed and edited by Zebulon Schmidt, and produced by Paul Kazee.